Hey guys, this is just a short video on a small point I wanted to make, which is around the whole idea of things being varied in your training. So a simple point here is that if you want to be able to train quite often, so often would be more than, let's say, 3 times per week, then you have to change quite often. So that type of training, it doesn't really matter what type of training that we're talking about. So what we could be talking about is somebody who, let's say, wants to run on a regular basis. So they need to vary their type of training they're doing on a regular basis. If, let's say, for example, you do CrossFit, you need to vary the type of training you're doing there on a regular basis. So we're going to go and talk about this as I go through a training session now at the end of a moment and show you how I'm making some variability within the individual training session and why that's so important. So this whole idea of things being more varied in your training kind of stems from even the work of the Russians back in the 60s. It's kind of one of the basis of Westside Barbell training. People like John Kiley, who's the head strength and conditioning coach for Irish Rugby, has spoken about this at length. People back in the 50s like Percy Cerruti, who's a famous running coach, they all are big fans of making sure that if you want to be able to train regularly, especially hard on a regular basis, then you need to be varying the stimulus that you're providing all of the time. And again, I'll explain as I close after this. Okay, so let's go to the training session. So let's go through this workout, and I'm just going to go through a set of deadlifts, which I'll be doing 5 sets of 5 reps, and I'm using a trap bar, and I'm going to be doing banded push-ups. I'm using trap bar because I haven't done it in a long time, in about maybe 6-8 weeks, but every single week that I program deadlifts for my group online or individual clients, we'll vary the style of deadlift. So I could use thick bar, I could use deficit deadlifts, banded deadlifts, pause deadlifts. There's always a way in which you could vary it off the floor. I could use kettlebells, vary the tool, vary the tempo all of the time, and that'll allow for a change in stimulus and make sure that we don't get burnt out doing the exact same movement pattern over and over again. You hit slightly different aspects of muscles as you do so. I'm using banded push-ups because I could have done them off rings, I could have done dips, I could have done a bench press. It's a horizontal pressing movement, so just change the style of horizontal pressing that you're doing all of the time. What you'll tend to find with this type of training also is that you'll get a lot stronger, and you'll also develop a more kind of rounded physique, that your muscles aren't kind of overemphasized in one area and underemphasized in another. It also allows for a massive amount of training volume to be able to be performed, so you're capable of being able to perform an awful lot of volume simply because you're varying all the time. So now that we've gone through the training session, you can see how I've kind of varied up those simple movements and how I would do that on a kind of day-to-day basis. This is something that I would do in the programming I put up on my online program, which is programmed around between 3 and 6 days per week, as it just depends on what time frame you have to work with. And I change that all the time. So the warm-ups are changing, the strength work is changing, the metcons are changing, the accessory work is changing. That changing stimulus provides us with constantly varied stimulus for our muscles to have to adapt to, or energy systems to have to adapt to. But also, as I had said before, it helps prevent overuse injuries, which we particularly see in people that want to participate in a particular type of sport the whole of the time. So that's why if you're dealing with, let's say, people who are quite young in a sport such as tennis, they should be avoiding early specialization in their sport as much as possible. So it means that, like, they're playing their sport 70% of the time, but 30% of the time they're playing other sports, so they don't develop overuse injuries just constantly doing the same movement patterns over and over again. You're still going to get some training stimulus from what you're doing. That's why people that would use my online program, for example, can go back to a movement that they have not done, such as, let's say, an overhead press with a barbell, and they haven't done that movement in about a month, but because they're working on handstand push-ups, seated dumbbell overhead presses, half kneeling presses, other movements that help support the upper back musculature, like upper back muscles, in rows and pull downs, all of those movements will contribute towards a better pressing capacity in, let's say, something like an overhead press. So you don't have to practice the movement that you're trying to get better at to constantly get better at it. What you need to practice is a varied way of doing the same movement pattern all of the time. So the movement pattern it doesn't have to be done specifically the exact same way all of the time. You're varying how you do that movement pattern, which is unbelievably important if you want to be able to train on a regular basis. If you're somebody who's just in the gym, like, you know, twice a week, you probably don't have to vary a great deal all of the time. You have some variance, but these are the sort of things you have to earn the right to have more variance in your program. If you're not training any more frequently in that, then it doesn't actually need to be all that complex. But don't vary just for variance sake. So there's no point in varying if all you're ever lifting is, like, you know, 2-pound dumbbells. There's not enough overload. So then we still need to strict kind of, you know, strength training or training principles in order for this to take its effect as well. So just a few points for you to consider, and just make sure that if you want to train often, you need to change often.